Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are we doing today? Everybody's got food. Okay, I got it. My name is Travis Williams. I'm the archivist and special collections librarian here at Munday Library. I want to thank you all so much for coming out here to Hillhops and to this panel event. This is Brews in the Books. We've got a wonderful lineup for you, and I'm going to let them talk because you came to see them, not me. But thank you for being here. We do have another panel right after this one at 6 o'clock that is Black Leaders in Brewing. It's going to be a great group of people. And then at 7 o'clock, the Austin Polka Band will be playing in the lobby. We have a representative here with us. He's on tuba. Everybody give it up for Mike, who is also doing video duty for us today. Thank you, Mike. And please welcome our panelists. I will let our moderator, Michael, take it away.
So welcome to the first panel, Brews in Books. So the first thing, I'm just going to have the panelists. I'm Dr. Michael Sapolo. I'm just going to have the panelists introduce themselves. As part of it, I will ask, please say something about your general scholarship, and then I think I'd like to do chronologically, so Kelley will go first, and then Alan will go. Okay, so Dr. Coblentz-Bautch.
It's good to see you all, and I'd like to thank Travis Williams and the Munday Library for hosting us. This is really a wonderful opportunity to think through beer and its role in civilization. I'm a professor in religious and theological studies, and my area of specialization is in the field of Judaism and Christianity in antiquity. I have a special interest in apocalyptic literature and on the topic of gender and religion.
Dr. Altimont.
Hello, Alan Altimont. I'm on the English faculty. I teach creative writing and a variety of literary subjects, and I'm kind of all over the map in terms of interests and whatnot. So as you'll see, it's a jack of all trades, master of none. Okay.
And I am Brian Sheerin. I teach early British literature and a lot of Shakespeare, and that's what I'll be talking about today, Shakespeare and beer. Back to Michael.
Okay, so first one would be Dr. Coblentz-Bautch. Her title is Beer and Ancient Books.
Thank you so much. So I have a handout for you all. I thought maybe some images would help provide us with some further thinking about this topic of beer in antiquity, and especially through the vantage of ancient books. So on the slide that has the title of the presentation just to the right, there's a slide that has an image of a field. It's of a barley field. And I wanted to just share with you that beer was widely consumed in the Fertile Crescent, definitely in Mesopotamia and in Egypt, but also in Israel as well. Beer culture is well known for ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, but not as well known was the consumption of beer in ancient Israel, because it also had a thriving production of wine. But scholars have been exploring more deeply how beer was consumed and how it was produced in ancient Israel. But I wanted to begin by just noting, in terms of thinking about beer in books and antiquity, how beer plays a role in ancient cultures in association with civilization and in civilizing. In fact, some people think about beer's production beginning maybe 5,000 years ago and being especially associated with settled communities and farming. But we find beer as being associated with civilization appearing in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And there, a friend of Gilgamesh, who's this epic hero, not always someone we might think of as a worthy protagonist, but he has a friend named Enkidu. And Enkidu starts out as a very wild man, quite the wild figure. And Enkidu is, let's say, domesticated by Shamhat, who is described sometimes as a courtesan. And she introduces Enkidu to both food and to beer. And the text is very specific there. Later, the friend of Gilgamesh, Enkidu, dies, and Gilgamesh is distraught, and he goes on a journey to learn about the possibility of immortality. He travels even to the end of the world, and there he meets at a tavern Siduri, And she shares with him this important wisdom, but the tavern is hers. So again, this idea of sagacity, of wisdom, of learning, of the best of humanity, it's being associated with beer culture in antiquity. Now I've mentioned Shamhat and Saduri, these two women in the Epic of Gilgamesh who have a connection to beer culture. But it's also thought by scholars that beer was produced by women, and they connect the production of beer also with the baking of bread. And it's tied to production of beer. And it's thought that in ancient Israel, that bread was made initially by taking cakes or bread and throwing this into water, letting it sit, first of all, taking malted barley, turning that into bread, and then throwing the bread into water, putting a stopper on it so fermentation can occur, also adding yeast, and then voila, several days later, you have beer. But women were integral to that process. So I think that's fascinating to note. In terms of how beer was consumed, people would drink it socially. They would oftentimes, at least as it's presented in Mesopotamia, share communal vessels and drink beer from straws. I don't know if we're doing that today, but that is apparently how many were consuming it. And oftentimes there were special there were oftentimes special beer jugs that had strainers to strain out presumably pieces of bread or cake. Also, when it comes to beer and religion, there's plenty to be said. Many goddesses were associated with beer, including the Egyptian goddess Hathor, or the Mesopotamian goddess Inanna, also known as Ishtar, and finally Ninkasi, who was a patron goddess of beer drinking. That having been said, what about in ancient Israel? So in ancient Israel, there were libations that were poured out to the head god, Yahweh, twice a day apparently, which according to archaeologist Michael Holman was about the equivalent of a six-pack a day that God was ritually consuming. So kind of quite interesting. Michael Holman and his colleague Jenny Abeling also found through their reading of Kohelet or Ecclesiastes in chapter 11 that there's this very unusual reference to casting your bread on water. What did that even mean? Well, Holman and Abeling discerned that this could be a reference to how beer was created, and that the whole point of this particular verse or verses from Ecclesiastes is to say, make beer, drink it, share it with your friends, because who knows what tomorrow may bring. It's another form of saying carpe diem. And then last, I should mention, since we're almost to the month of February, that the patron saint of beer is Saint Brigid of Ireland, and her feast day is February 1st, and she is associated with a number of miracles that may remind you some of the miracles of Jesus. She turns water into beer. She does this for visiting priests. She does this for a leprous colony. And apparently the beer was the best that anyone had ever consumed. And then the last miracle I think is kind of neat. Right around the Easter season, from Maundy Thursday to Easter, they had only a barrel of beer, and with her special saintly qualities, it extends that one barrel for the whole Easter season. So how about that, St. Brigid? That's what I'd like to share with you all, and just to extend my thanks again to Travis Williams, and also to these scholars, Jenny Abeling and Michael Holman, archaeologists who really, I think, pioneered the study of beer in the ancient Near East. Thank you.
So I'd like to inform the panelists I'm changing the format that I sort of told you a little bit. So I'll take one or two questions specific to the speaker right after, but I promise you, if you have general questions that could be for all, I'll give you time at the end as well. Are there any questions specific to Dr. Coblentz-Bautch's presentation?
Well, my question for you all, do you think you would enjoy beer that began as a cake or as bread. Are you intrigued? Would you try it?
I try, okay.
I would too.
Yeah.
I would too.
Yeah.
Yeah, hearty.
I think there's a bread stout still that's made. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if they make it that way. I've never had it.
Well, if you need more time, certainly I'll give you time. So let's move on to Dr. Altimont with the title. Let's see, yours is Gender and Overindulgence, an English alewife, and an American Supreme Court Justice.
Okay. And you stole my St. Bridget. Yeah, but that's great. No, that was cool. That was really cool to hear that. Yeah. All right. So, and I want to credit my daughter, who's sitting here, Kat, for reminding me of the Bud Light Dylan Mulvaney brouhaha that took place last year. So, leave it to Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene to provide the perfect lead into my presentation. I would have bought the king of beers, but it changed its gender to the queen of beers. The Congresswoman's pearl-clutching quip about Bud Light, brief flirtation with trans influencer Dylan Mulvaney didn't get as much press as Kid Rock's macho machine gunning of a couple of cases of the gender traitorous brew. But she did come up with a surprisingly astute thought. Beer has gender. And in modern America, that gender is masculine, though maybe not dependably masculine, as MTG implies, and liable to get all girly on us like Ms. Mulvaney. Ale and beer's long history, though, reveals that actually it has been trans for several centuries. Indeed, for most of its existence, it used to be feminine. Ale and beer's transformation from feminine to masculine was brought about not by hormone treatments and surgery, but by early capitalism. And as Professor Bass has just demonstrated for us, beer has a long history of production by women. And what I'm focusing on here, because my job is to talk about the Middle Ages a little bit, is a very strange poem by a transitional figure named John Skelton. And his poem is called The Tunning of Eleanor Rumming. It's as far as I know, it's the longest piece of English literature about beer. But it's also attacking this alewife, Eleanor Rumming. So let me just leap into that here. It's a 562-line poem. Tunning is an old word derived from tun, the largest cask made in those days with a capacity of up to 300 gallons. Tunning could refer to making, storing, or consuming beer. Eleanor Rumming was a real woman who served her own ale at her tavern south of London and was fined in 1525 for overcharging customers. So she was clearly no saint. Skelton's poem, which probably dates to that time, so thoroughly trashes Eleanor and her establishment that it is credited with helping to turn brewing in England from a woman's cottage industry into an early big business dominated by men. There's a little bit about Skelton here, but I'm going to skip through that and just get right down to the poem itself. And I won't subject you to late Middle English pronunciation. I'll sort of modernize a lot of this so you can understand it a little bit better too. So, how does he deal with poor Eleanor? Maybe he didn't care for her ale. More likely is that, like most churchmen of his time, he had double standards and was a raging misogynist. For instance, he devotes the first 80 lines to how ugly Eleanor is. So ugly, she would make any man who looked at her go limp. The next 70 lines describe her poverty-stricken and desperate female customers running to buy her brew, their bare legs and feet dirty, tattered clothes exposing their breasts, their hair uncovered about their face, their tresses unthrust. Next comes a long description of her hog-infested establishment, her brewing, and her claims that her ale is both a fountain of youth and an aphrodisiac. So any brewers in here, listen to this now. What's her secret? Turns out it's chicken shit. The hens run in the mash vat, for they go to roost straight over the ale juice. The juice would be a kind of a bowl to catch the ale. And dung, that is shit, when it comes in the ale tuns. Then Eleanor taketh the mash bowl, and shaketh the hen's dung away, and skimmeth it into a tray where the yeast is with her mangy fists. And sometimes she blends the dung of her hens and the ale together, and saith, Gossip will be your best friend. Gossip, come hither. This ale shall be thicker. Ooh, no wonder, yeah. And flour the more quicker, which I assume means to ferment. Yum. The poem gets even nastier with 65 lines on how the women, poor villagers and all pretty clearly alcoholics, barter for Eleanor's brew with produce, wool, a girdle, a wedding ring, a husband's hood, another's cap. The most desperate barter away their husband's farm tools they need to survive. The second half of the poem portrays woman after woman arriving at Eleanor's establishment and getting drunk. The most distressing of them is drunken Alice, who manically talks on and on till, as she was drinking, she fell in a winking with a barley hood. A barley hood is a drunken tantrum. She pissed where she stood. Then began she to weep, and forthwith fell on sleep. Eleanor took her up and blessed her with a cup of new ale. So where are the men? Where are the men? They must be there, as even, I forgot to say, he was a Catholic priest, Skelton. Father Skelton is, by implication, ogling the women disapprovingly as he sips his own chicken shit ale. Her breath was sour and stale, and smelled all of ale. Such a bedfellow would make one cast his craw. Yet for all that, she drank on the mash fat. Not one of this. There's no telling what impact Skelton's poem actually had on the gradual displacement of women brewers, which probably would have happened anyway with the loss of many other women's cottage industries. But there's no disputing the fact that the twinning of Eleanor Woman was bad PR, not only for Eleanor, but also for other alewives, portraying a woman's brew as unsanitary, and drinking women as addicts whose habit brings on poverty, loss of sex appeal, and marital discord. I shouldn't be reading this, I should be talking about it. Perhaps we don't see the men, because in this medieval priest's eyes, there's nothing unmanly about a drunken man. Drunken women, though, become unwomanly, and therefore a sorry but laughable spectacle. Now you're wondering why I'm doing this, so this is the punchline. Times have changed, and the brewing of beer is now mostly a man's game. Moreover, thanks to today's craft brewers, we don't have to worry about chicken shit in ale or settle for mass-produced piss water like Bud Light. But our attitudes about gender and overindulgence do not seem to have changed. Witness Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kid Rock stoutly defending beer's apparently unstable masculinity. So in counterpoint to our late medieval poem about overindulging women, I now invite you to recollect a bit of all-American political theater that put a national spotlight on beer and an overindulgent man. The September 27th, 2018 Senate confirmation hearing of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, whose drinking during high school, college, and law school was attested to, questioned, defended, and then brushed aside as of no consequence. As you will recall, what occasioned the senator's interest in Kavanaugh's drinking habits were his own diary and yearbook entries and the largely credible accusation by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford that a drunken Kavanaugh had sexually assaulted her in 1982 when she was 15 and he 17. Like many other young men, Kavanaugh learned to drink when socializing with his fellow football players. In his case, at an elite all-boys prep school. How much could you chug? How much could you hold? Were you more of a daredevil, but still skillful driver when you were drunk? These were just some of the ways you could use beer along with football to test and prove your manhood. I like beer, the nominee divulged. What he did not say is that he also seemed to like how drinking drowned his inhibitions. Privileged already and beered up enough to be untroubled by second thoughts, he could do what he wanted with a woman younger than him and only half his size, and then he could forget about it. The majority of the senators wanted to forget about it too. Perhaps they did believe her account, but privately realized that Kavanaugh's youth and his beer-impaired judgment should not be held against him, just another young man being manly. If that shady rationalizing was really behind their decision to give him a pass, then Kavanaugh's I like beer mantra was, in effect, his alibi, his passport to greater power than he deserves. Now he can impose his will on all the women of the United States, not in dark bedrooms, but in the well-lit highest courtroom in the land. I like beer too. It quenches our thirst, it makes us feel good, it helps us celebrate good times, but when we men drink too much of what we now think of as a man's drink, we can do at least as much damage, not only to ourselves, but also to others, as the women in a poem supposedly did to themselves and their families some 500 years ago, when Skelton fancied ale a woman's drink and a woman's problem. In enlightened modern America, it still can turn out to be a woman's problem, but not in the ways Skelton cared to imagine.
So is there a question specific to Dr. Altimont's presentation? I have one.
Yeah.
So I only just heard about Skelton when you mentioned you were going to talk about Skelton.
Yeah.
But the dangers of Google led me to a couple of just this thing.
Okay.
So he wrote at least one other much shorter poem, I think a two-stanza poem about beer. And I forget the exact title, but something, milk and ale.
Oh yeah, Marjorie Morning Milk in there. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It's all,
Yeah.
yeah. So now, this morning, I saw that somebody wrote their doctoral dissertation on Skelton. I just read the abstract, but although the entire dissertation was available. So in the abstract, he was about to argue that because of his subject, mainly with beer, and because beer's sort of lowbrow reputation, as it was part of the reason why Skelton himself didn't really get a lot of praise or esteem with his contemporaries and even after. Do you get a sense that that's true or not?
Well, I don't know that dissertation, of course, but he was actually very well connected. He had been educated at Cambridge and Oxford. He taught at Oxford. He was poet laureate of England in the early 1500s, and he also tutored Princes Arthur and Henry. Henry becomes Henry VIII. So he was very well connected, and I doubt that anything he wrote, in the way of like fun poetry like that would have hurt his reputation at all. Yeah, I'll tell one story. One of the legends about him is that he had an illegitimate child, and his parishioners were like, talking about this. He comes into mass on Sunday, and he has the baby in his hands. He says, "How could such a beautiful child be sinful?" And everyone was like, so maybe he'd been drinking then too. I don't know, but yeah. So
Sounds progressive.
yeah, kind of.
Okay, let's move on to Dr. Sheeran's presentation, and then we'll come back to more questions afterwards.
I guess I'll steal the microphone. All right, hi everyone. I'm talking about Shakespeare today, and I thought I'd start off, as I usually do in my classes, with a little quiz. I'm gonna broaden this not just to include beer. I am gonna narrow it down to beer eventually, but can any of you have any associations of drinking, any kind of drinking alcoholic beverages in a Shakespeare play? Anything come to mind? Yeah.
Mercutio and Romeo and Juliet.
Mercutio, yeah.
Because he gets drunk and he just does silly things all the time.
That's right. There was a lot of drinking in Romeo and Juliet, and the party that the Capulets throw, they're going to, I think, crush a cup of wine or two.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of alcohol mentioned in that first half. Great. What else? Yes.
The Queen carouses, the last act of Hamlet.
Yes, Hamlet features a lot of references to alcohol. Hamlet criticizes Denmark for being overindulgent in their drinking. It's a habit that gives Denmark a bad reputation, and perhaps appropriately, the way Gertrude, the queen, dies is through drinking poisoned wine. Yeah, great. Chris, did you want-
Falstaff and Henry VIII.
Of course, Falstaff. Henry, that's actually what I'm going to talk about today, or at least Henry the Fourth, the play. Any others come to mind? What about Macbeth? Anything come to mind there? to give her courage to concoct the assassination of Duncan. She also gives wine to the guards.
That's right.
So that they fall asleep.
Yeah.
So he can be killed. Yeah, anything else?
Were the sailors in the Tempest drunk when they met Caliban?
Tempest, yeah, there's a lot of alcohol in Tempest. The whole subplot is, two drunk guys, and they share their alcohol with Caliban, and he becomes like enamored of this new beverage, and again, he uses it to kind of concoct an assassination scheme. Yeah, very good. Almost all of these references in Shakespeare, of which there are so many. One scholar I was reading counted among Shakespeare's 40 plays at least 20 major drinking scenes, and almost 400 references to alcoholic beverages. Almost all of the references, however, are to wine rather than beer, which I didn't realize until I was putting this together. And do you know why that might be? There are several possible explanations, but I think one probably major explanation of why wine predominates over beer, even though beer was far more consumed than wine in his day. It has to do with who was drinking. And beer was considered a lower class beverage, whereas wine was for the elite. And indeed, almost all of Shakespeare's characters are in that elite realm. They tend to be upper class characters who get all the poetic lines. So that's, I think, the main reason. But I'm going to talk about a couple of plays that buck that trend. And it's a pair of plays, history plays, called Henry IV, Parts 1 and Part 2. And I know that sounds like the most boring possible play, Henry IV, Part 1 and Part 2. But I promise it's one of Shakespeare's best plays, and the sequel. And it features not only beer drinking, but a prince who gravitates toward beer, and not just beer, but tavern life in general. And this is Prince Hal. Prince Hal is the son of Henry IV. The play is called Henry IV, but it's really more about Henry IV's son, Prince Hal, who's in his upper teens or 20s, and he's going to be king someday. But he really is making an embarrassment of himself by hanging out in the taverns. And his father even comments on how ashamed he is of his son. He says this: "Amongst the taverns he daily doth frequent with unrestrained loose companions, which he, young wanton and effeminate boy, takes on the point of honor to support so dissolute a crew." A lot of his companions are not really upright citizens. His most famous companion is probably Shakespeare's greatest drinker in all of his plays, and this would be who you mentioned, Max, and that is Falstaff. Oh, that was you. Yes, sorry. Yeah, Clarice, thank you. Falstaff. Falstaff is enormous. He's an old man who just basically lives in the taverns, and everything he does is just revolves around drinking alcohol. But Falstaff, what makes him different than everybody else in the tavern is that he is a knight, technically. His name is Sir John Falstaff. And he never loses track of his upper class roots because he will not drink beer. Falstaff is a wine drinker. He likes a drink called sack. And sack is a dry white wine from Spain, an imported wine, sacco, sack coming from sacco, meaning dry. But Prince Hal, he's not like Falstaff. his tastes are very wide-ranging, and he gravitates toward beer. He even tells his friends, like, "Do you think it's a problem that I like beer so much?" And not just any beer. He likes what's called small beer. Small beer is the lowest class beer. It's weak beer. It's the cheapest kind. It's also interesting that Hal prefers beer over ale. And to me, I mean, these days, beer and ale kind of mean the same thing for me. I never really thought about it. And maybe someone can help elaborate the difference between beer and ale nowadays. But there was a distinct difference between beer and ale in the 16th century, 15th century, and 16th century. Does anyone know what that is? The difference between beer and ale? Beer had hops, and ale didn't. And hops were kind of a weird new ingredient that were, beer only came to England for the first time around the year 1400. Before that, it was just ale, which was easy to home brew. And hops were imported from the Low Countries, like Netherlands. So hops, right away, everyone was suspicious of hops. It was some foreign ingredient, and it seemed like to be competition against what the English drink, which is supposed to be ale. And some counties even prohibited the sale of hops to make beer, even into the 16th century. It was called that wicked and pernicious weed. And some of the writers on dietary health said ale for an Englishman is a natural drink. Beer is a natural drink for a Dutchman. The problem is, of course, hops makes the liquor objectively better in a lot of ways, right? It makes it more stable, it's longer lasting, it's a preservative, it can be transported, it has a more consistent flavor when you make it. So eventually beer became a serious competitor. And soon the English authorities were seeing the imported beer starting to outsell the ale. And so there's a big push to embrace hops and to grow hops. And so this is what happened. And so drinking English beer around the time Shakespeare was writing was almost a nationalistic, a patriotic thing to do. Because you were not only supporting local economies, but you were thwarting the imports, especially from the Dutch. So it's interesting, Prince Hal's choice of beer, as yes, it's a low-class drink, but he's drinking to the health of England also. So there's a lot more complicated stuff that happens with Prince Hal, but suffice it to say that he thinks he can just, when he becomes king, leave the tavern life behind and become a new person. He thinks this is just temporary. Someday I'll be king, and this will be my old life. But he realizes it's not so easy. This is what Henry IV Part 2 is about. It's not so easy. He actually keeps gravitating back toward the tavern, even when he wants to leave it behind. And it's not because he has a drinking problem, I don't think, or not just because he has a drinking problem, but it's because, there's something, I think Shakespeare is trying to communicate, perhaps, that, the path to success isn't just, because he does become a very successful king eventually, but the path to that success isn't just leaving behind all of your low desires. It's figuring out how to accommodate them, figuring out how to compromise. And that's what he does with great success eventually. Yeah. So thanks.
Any questions for Dr. Sheerin? Yes.
At the time of this play's setting, what was the stance of the church on beer versus ale, and how does that relate to Prince Hal's choices?
That's a good question. I think the church was pretty innovative. It always had been in the monasteries. And there weren't any more monasteries in England at the time Shakespeare was writing. But the church seemed to embrace it pretty readily, from what I know. But that's a great question. That could be a whole separate study. Yeah, thanks.
I have a question for everybody. So you had mentioned in terms of wine versus beer, wine, who drinks it. You mentioned, and we've always about beer has this low class, low brow reputation. So do people know that? Okay, I didn't know this. So Benjamin Franklin has a famous quote about wine and beer. Do people know it? So he said, "In wine there's wisdom, in beer there's freedom, and in water there's bacteria." Now, so in beer there's freedom, right? Now, Ray Bradbury, again, I just Google, right? There's a quote from him that says, "Beer's intellectual. What a shame so many idiots drink it." So my question is, what different attributes have been associated with beer? So we've seen freedom, we've seen intellectual, but we have low brow. So can you pinpoint different instances where beer is associated with sophistication or other sort of anachronistic sort of attribute?
I can comment on my own period, which is 16th century. During high prices of malt, beer brewers would often threaten to shut down their production, and they often did in the early days of the century. But the government actually made this illegal. They thought beer was very important to drink because it was seen as having all sorts, and ale, beer/ale. I'm kind of lumping those together. It was thought to have a lot of health benefits, more so than water. So you were encouraged, even children were encouraged to drink beer rather than water for your own health and strength. It was for your own good. Yeah. So that's all I know.
And that no doubt had been going on for millennia, I would imagine.
Right.
Because the being sure about the quality of water, I would imagine in lots of parts of the world would have been impossible, and in cities in particular, even the most ancient cities. So beer became, I think, the go-to, or ale, the go-to drink for sanitary reasons. There's stuff in other English poetry of the Renaissance too about workers in the field, and you would refresh yourself, like a breakfast break, a morning break when you're working in the fields with different types of concoctions, but some of them could involve ale or beer, vinegar even, cider, apple cider, and hard cider, things like that, rather than water. So there was a sense that you could do a job drinking beer. That's really hard to imagine today, isn't it? But yeah.
And I would just return to this the issue of stigma. And I don't think there was a negative perspective on beer in the ancient Near East. I think it was widely seen as a drink that the civilized consume. So I would offer that. Maybe attitudes change over time.
Are there other questions from the audience? I don't want to neglect you. Okay, thanks. Some more questions. So, I think
You let Michael do all the work.
actually, so all the questions I've asked so far were mine, but the organizer, or the main organizer, Travis Williams, actually gave me some questions. So I think we answered a little bit how's representation of beer drinking culture evolved in literature over different eras. I think that's been addressed. So I'll ask this one. This is from Travis Williams. How do authors navigate the fine line between romanticizing or critiquing beer or just alcohol in their writing?
Well, in the case of Skelton, there's no fine line. It's just- but again, we don't see him drinking. We were kind of invited to imagine that he's there drinking and passing judgment on everybody around him, the women drinkers in particular. But yeah, he has nothing to say about the men, and of course nothing to say about himself either, other than that he finds it distasteful to watch the women drink and get drunk and waste their livelihoods on buying alcohol. So his view is really, I think it's got to be one of the most negative views of drinking, at least in English literature, until you get to maybe Dickens or somebody like that. Yeah.
In the late 16th century, you have the rise of Puritanism. And Puritanism really started having moral opinions about how much alcohol to drink. It was taken for granted that everybody drank beer or ale. That wasn't the question, but how much to drink. And when the taverns were allowed to be open. Because some people there's no rule to close the taverns in some regions on Sundays. So that could be a problem. Speaking of Puritans, there's one Shakespeare play I'm surprised nobody mentioned. It has a lot of drinking in it, and that is Twelfth Night. Twelfth Night features some, mostly aristocrats in Olivia's household who just throw a party every single night. I'm thinking of a guy named Sir Toby Belch and Sir Andrew Aguchi.
Yes.
And the household manager, the steward, named Malvolio, he's so annoyed at this, and he tells them, he always goes down, he's their social inferior, but he tells them, you gotta stop, this is too much excess. And he says something to the detective, you Puritan, just because you don't like to, carouse with us doesn't mean you can prevent people from consuming cakes and ale, right? A famous line that I can't quote exactly, but so there was some tension along those lines in the plays. Yeah. Here you go.
I might add, in terms of biblical text, there was, of course, some concern about overindulgence in some texts, and I find fascinating the restriction posed on Nazarites, individuals who would take a vow who were prohibited from consumption of alcohol. But it's quite interesting in terms of a more positive view on overindulgence. One thinks, for example, of the celebration of Purim, a springtime festival that's very carnivalesque. It's a holiday that remembers the Book of Esther, and there's a dramatic reading of the Book of Esther, and people are supposed to consume and drink, not necessarily beer, maybe wine, but until they can no longer tell the difference between the name Haman and Mordecai. So in that context, overindulgence is prescribed.
And I would add to that the Song of Songs, although that's all wine, but love is intoxicating. I don't think there's actually ever any passage in it that actually are drinking, but it's part of the metaphors of the poem. Yeah.
Shukor velo meyaim, drunk but not from love, or drunk from not drunk. Yes, my better half is going to correct me.
You had a question?
Yes, Dr. Altimont, this is for you. Do you think that there were any writers at the time that kind of opposed Skelton's depiction of women drinking beer?
Not that I'm aware of. And most of the writers being male, I think most of them, if they had expressed opinions, they would have maybe backed him up. And again, there's nothing about the men's drinking, which I find kind of most fascinating. Sometimes it's what's left out of a poem or a story that's kind of revealing. And I think that is really revealing. It is about the women, and yeah, I just can't think of an example of that. It'd be nice if there were, I suppose, but yeah, I can't think of anything.
Because I thought it was just an interesting transition to go from Dr. Bautch, your talk about how beer is associated with femininity and with women, and then instantly your presentation is all about like the complete flip. And so I was like, during that time, was there anyone, or did the transition kind of happen way before that? I was curious. I've never come across anything like that. One of the things that I was like piggybacking on some things about hops and whatnot, and Brian and I were talking about this before too. It could be, for instance, that the transfer of a lot of this that was women's work to men may have happened because when the monasteries did shut down and the monks were given the choice, do you want to leave, or shall we kill you, or do you want to convert? No doubt there were men who were brewing in the monasteries, and it could well be that they came out of the monasteries in the 1530s and helped this transition to men being more kind of active in that. And then just what we know about hops too, which have to be grown on these structures, these big kind of, you need carpenters to do these things. And that probably would have been men's work, the tending of hops, I would imagine. So that kind of allowed men to become more and more involved in the production of beer rather than the good old wine, good old ale that was being done in, probably in kitchens all over the place too. Yeah, that's the best I can do with that.
Any more questions from the audience?
Yeah, I got one. You all mentioned hops or no hops, and you mentioned the bread cakes to get the beer started. But can you give other examples of ingredients that were in use or beer styles that may have died out?
And last part of your question, could we give examples of other ingredients that were used?
Ingredients, whatever they threw in the beer.
Yeah.
And if you do a quick web search, you come across a cocktail which involves the chicken in the beer. And I don't know if that's true or not.
But not chicken shit, I imagine. Just chicken, yeah. Okay. Feathers,
I know that sometimes beers were sweetened with figs, honey, and dates in antiquity.
Well, Belgians have a lot of fruit-flavored beer, but it's not as a source of fermentation, I don't think, right?
There's all sorts of spices in wine, but English beer was just barley. So it didn't get too creative in the 16th century.
That's a good question.
Other questions?
Good question.
Let's see. Oh, okay. So let's bring back. So you kind of answered this next question a little bit. So it's the wine versus beer. You had mentioned that overwhelmingly references wine. Is overwhelmingly in favor of beer, and you mentioned about the people who drank it. So my question was about. So I was looking stuff up again, Google, and I was looking up French and Francophone literature. So I saw something where they said in about 4,000 French or Francophone texts, they counted the references of various types of alcohol, beer, wine. And so I saw, so they said the number for wine and said the number for beer. When I computed the ratio, it was 8-1. So 8 mentions of wine per one mentioned beer. Do you think in purely English source literature it's better, or do you think it's about the same? I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it's a fair question or not. But.
Oh yeah, that's about the ratio in Shakespeare. Yeah, sounds right.
I couldn't say for like Chaucer. I'm not sure, but I bet you could produce some kind of statistics about that. Chaucer's father was a wine merchant, And so you get references to wine there. He probably was bringing wine from both Italy and France and Spain into England and servicing the nobility primarily. And so I think when you encounter wine in Chaucer, it's very similar to what it'd be in Shakespeare. And I can't off the top of my head though think of any references to beer, but well, at Harry's Tavern in Southwark where they all gathered, that's where they would have been drinking ale, no doubt. So, but I don't remember any real specific descriptions of it. I think it's just assumed that everyone would know that.
Did you know that Oliver Cromwell was called the Brewer?
Yeah.
And that, I think it was an insult.
Probably. Yeah.
Because he was, pretty lower status.
Yeah.
This is the guy who led England after the English Civil War in the 17th century. And he was called this not only to designate his low class status, but because his mother was a brewer.
Ah.
Actually, I should say brewster. The
Yeah,
word for a
that's
female
right,
brewer
that's
is
right.
a brewster.
Brewster, yeah.
And so clearly women were still very involved in the brewing process, even in the 17th century. But that's another interesting way in which beer kind of made its way into politics.
Well, I'm sorry to end this. Oh, go ahead. Last question.
I was thinking of American Prohibition, and I was wondering if there were any analogs to that earlier in history, during the periods that you guys have looked at.
Would it be during the Cromwell's rule? No, but no strict prohibitions.
Yeah, I don't think so, but I don't know.
I don't know. I remember coming across in some writing about 18th and 19th century American culture that this writer had estimated that probably about at least 40% of the adult population of the United States, like the 1840s, about 40% were probably alcoholic, or what we would think of as alcoholic, and but there was I can't think of anything during that time period where anyone tried to prohibit that, but certainly temperance societies were starting up then, in reaction to that, mostly Protestant based, that's a good question.
I think we'll leave it at. Oh, one last. Sorry.
We're thinking here if during the time you're talking about beer was way stronger than today due to all the regulations there are.
I don't think so. At least not in my period. It was
Small beer.
Well, small beer could be as low as 2% alcohol, and normal beer around 5%, I think. And then there was something called double beer, which is a very strong beer. So it was basically equivalent to the range of beers you could find today. Yeah.
Malt liquor.
What's that?
Malt liquor.
Malt liquor.
Double beer.
I'm sorry to end it there. We have another panel starting in about 5 minutes. Let's thank